Welcome back to Neuroconversant Leadership, where we talk about effective leadership and communication, especially in the STEM workplace. I'm Jeremy Doran, and I love helping people make the transition into leadership, especially if they are engineers like me, because it's just a little harder for us. Today, we have a special guest, Andrew Haughian. Andrew, welcome.
Great to be here, Jeremy.
Can you give us all a little bit of background on what you do now and a little bit of how you got there?
Okay, great. Well, also an engineer, mechanical engineer, graduated many years ago, about 25 years ago. And for most of my career, I've worked in venture capital at a firm called Pangea Ventures. And we're a pretty unique firm. We invest in hard tech. And so companies leveraging intellectual property around material science, chemistry, biology. And, the thought process there is that the big challenges faced by the world really do require these breakthrough innovations. And, it's a difficult area to invest in. But, we've been doing this now for 25 years. I've been working at Pangea for 19 of those. And, we've sort of figured out, the secret sauce and the kind of keys to making that work successfully.
Can you share some of the secrets?
Yeah, for sure. So, one of the things that's really important is getting the timing right. What we learned in our early years is that when we invest in really cool science at the early stage, no matter how exciting the technology is and enthusiastic the entrepreneurs are, it's almost impossible to determine how long that will really take to come to the market and start to kind of hit that inflection point that the venture capital asset class, really needs to see. So we do like to wait until companies, get to that commercial stage. The good thing is, we often learn about companies, years before that. And so we tend to like to get to know the teams over a period of time, build that relationship and trust and see how they're progressing. And then that, puts us in a good position when they do hit that inflection point. So that's a key one. Another thing is we think it's really important to be, capital efficient. Sometimes these hard tech innovations are inherently not capital efficient. And, to be honest, that makes it quite a struggle for the venture capital asset class. And so, we like to try to find companies where the business models can be, a little bit like software, even though it is hard tech. So those are a couple of things. There's others as well, but we'll get into that later on in the discussion.
Perfect. So, just out of curiosity, when you say kind of like software, does that mean that there's ongoing revenue stream per product, like maintenance or that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, some of our companies have sort of a hardware as a service business model. And so that's one option. There's various, partnership strategies with larger companies that will sometimes put in the capital that's required. So could be licenses, joint ventures, those sort of models tend to work a lot better than, build it and they will come. And that's often the mentality that the engineer takes. They say, okay, just give me the money and I'll do my thing and then the customers will come. And what we've learned over our period is that's often, not the case. You do really need to be sort of customer centric from the very beginning.
So it's interesting because there are a few different parties involved. There's more than that, but you talked about the engineer, and in my experience, engineers want to build the best, coolest thing, and the salespeople want the thing that they can sell, and customers may be looking for something totally different. And then as a venture capitalist, you're looking for a fourth thing. So how do you go about getting everyone in alignment on that?
Yeah, I think it is the responsibility of the entrepreneurs to lead there. I think when venture investors or any investors tell management or a company what to do, that's never a good thing. So we do like to see the entrepreneurs have that pulse on the market and the customer to know what's needed, to understand where there's product market fit. You're right that often the tendency for engineering people is to sort of over analyze, over optimize, get to that perfect product. And sometimes that's not what's required. We often talk about like the minimum viable product. And so what is the minimum thing you need to do to show that what you're doing, creates value? And then that can be the platform to, to go from there. And so I think that, that's a model that we like to see.
Great. But it's not easy to have both sides of the equation in one person. So let's go back to your background. You started out as a mechanical engineer and then you moved into what you're doing. What was that process like?
Yeah, so, I never really worked in the sort of traditional engineering roles. I worked in a couple of, consulting roles I'm from Canada, so, traditional Canadian industries like oil and gas and mining. So I was involved in technical roles, but I was not doing sort of deep new engineering work. And I found, I tended to, like working on things for a few weeks, and then sort of my mind would drift, and I'd want to, do something different. So then I did end up doing an MBA to sort of bring in that sort of business, expertise, and that's when I started, at Pangea. It's been a great fit for me because, as I said, I like to do different things, multitask. My mind is always kind of wandering, and every day we're talking to many different companies doing many different things. We're also doing many different things on our within our firm, and so it works well for me.
I love that. I am the same. I work with a lot of different companies, and the first thing I always ask for is a tour. They're like, "You really want a tour?" I'm like, "I absolutely want a tour because what you do is fascinating." It's fun talking to different companies doing different things often.
Yeah. So it's definitely one of the best parts of what I do. So
love it. So when you went to school for your MBA, were the things that you learned there business oriented, like finance oriented, leadership oriented, or was it a combination of all the things?
Yeah, it was pretty general. I would say if I look back at what was the most valuable from that experience, and translate into what we do at Pangea, it was actually probably the leadership and people side of it. Venture capital is really a people business. It's getting to know people, understanding how people work. I think actually a really valuable education to go into this business would be psychology. It's kind of have to peel back the onion to get to really know people. So I think that part of it was probably the most useful. The sort of traditional business functions like finance and marketing, to be honest, I think you can kind of learn those, working for a few years within this industry. The engineering education is incredibly valuable for what I do. However, I'm not getting into the weeds, but, it's very helpful to understand, sometimes sort of difficult concepts pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's great. I went to school for engineering and psychology, and I got interviews from people who were just wanted to meet the guy who did those two things because it was so unusual.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's a nice combination.
When you are dealing with entrepreneur kind of is someone who probably is a technical person who developed some product, but entrepreneurship itself is really going out and finding ways to sell it. Are there particular things that you have found technical people struggle with as they are developing the sales of a product and developing a team behind them?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is, when a company starts out, there's a few people, and often let's just say the CEO, they're doing many different things, and they're doing technology development, they're writing patents, they're kind of doing everything. And, and they're also, at least hopefully, they're talking to customers. And at some point, they need to shift into kind of leadership mode where they're not doing everything. They're making sure they're spending a lot of time finding the right people that are often, better than them at specific things. And so that's a huge part of their job. They're spending, time with customers to really make sure they understand those customers' insights so they can make sure they have the right offering. they're making sure the company is adequately funded to execute on kind of the vision. And so I think what we sometimes see is those people struggle to make that transition, continue to want to do everything, themselves, including the technology activities, and because they think that they can do that better than anyone else, and then it's sort of like they kind of get overwhelmed and they're doing a lot of things but nothing really well. That's a common theme that we see.
Is there a point at which it normally turns either into complete overwhelm or they figure out how to get to that next level? Is there a size?
Yeah, I'd say the size of company is probably in the 15 to 20 people range. That's, below 15, 20, you can kind of operate as a organization that just kind of almost like manages itself. But then, once you get larger than that, you need to have, more like separate functions, and there needs to be a little bit more structure and hierarchy. And you need to have specialists in particular areas. And I think it's a common struggle, and the best entrepreneurs figure that out. And sometimes they don't figure it out right away, but eventually they figure it out.
Yeah. Is there anything you do to help them accelerate that, figuring it out?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's so one of the things that often happens is when we really like companies that are scrappy. They know how to do more with less, and generally in the earlier days of the company, that serves them well. They're not wasting money. Sometimes money doesn't solve all their problems. It's just a matter of time and creativity and, thinking differently. But then there is a time when they do need to kind of make that transition. But often because the mindset has been in this like scrappy mode, they struggle to make that transition. And so, one of the key things is giving them the confidence that the time, now is the time to do that. And so that's one of the things I found, really important in my role. And that's often, when we're getting involved, that's something they need to be thinking about. None of this happens, of course, if we don't have a really high level of trust with the people that we're working with. So, that relationship part, is sort of a precursor, to having that. And then, the other thing, what we try to do is just, we don't want to be the expert in their business, but we've seen a lot of other companies that are also, they have similar challenges, and we can provide those case studies. We can introduce them to the people that were involved in those other companies so they can hear that directly from them. And, ultimately they need to figure that out themselves.
Got it. A couple of minutes ago, you talked about them figuring out the vision, and it seems to me that in the beginning they don't necessarily have a vision, and at some point they need to step back from the day-to-day operations and really look at the whole thing to develop a strategy. And I've found that very often people need help with that. What have you seen around when that happens and what kind of help they need?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, often, we find that they have an idea of the vision, but it's something they're constantly flushing out. And often we find they actually flush that out during the fundraising process. And so most entrepreneurs don't really like the fundraising process, but it actually can be pretty helpful for companies. And so, in say a typical venture fundraising process, you might be talking to 50 or 100, investors. And every investor will have their view, their perspective, their view on where the company should go, or what the strategy should be. A good entrepreneur will not do exactly as anyone says. They'll take that feedback, that sort of almost like crowdsourced feedback from many different people, and they'll synthesize that and figure out the best answer. And then often that sort of vision, comes from that. So that's one of the things that we see. It's a really important thing that, the company has that. And that's, doing these things is hard. So you have to have that big vision. Mm-hmm. I think what you also need to do is couple that with like a dose of reality that it's really hard too. And so You need to say, this is the big prize. This is where we want to be, but it's going to be a big challenge, and be really honest with yourselves. And so we actually like people that sort of are able to do both. It's not sugarcoating everything. It's huge prize, but there's challenges along the way, and being able to communicate that with everyone that's involved.
I recently had a guest on, and he had a quote that I really liked. He said that strategy without execution is a hallucination. So he's like, because when I was early in my days, we had this great idea, and someone was asking him, he's like, basically our idea was Facebook, but there were 25 people who had the idea of Facebook, and one person executed far better than anyone else. There's kind of layers of, like, there's the vision, and then there's figuring out the strategy to get to the vision, and then there's the execution of that strategy.
Yeah, exactly.
So what are things that technical people who are entrepreneurs and now leading a company can do to get better at leading the people and really forming a cohesive team?
Yeah, I think we kind of touched on it with the mission, part. That's really important to have that as the North Star, and being able to communicate that. The other thing is, I think, in a startup, you need to have a team people. You need to be very careful about what, the people that you bring onto the team. You really need to be spending a lot of time finding the best people, in the world. So these people may not be your friends. They may not be people that you've worked with before, but you have spent the time to find the best people in the world that are well suited to execute on this vision that you have, and you're able to sort of bring them together under that sort of common sort of mission. So I think that's really important. And if there's someone on the team that is not performing that way, you need to have the courage to be able to to sort of make a transition if needed. The other thing is often the skills that are needed at one stage of a company can change. And so sometimes there's people that are well suited, at the earlier stages, but not so much like later on. And you need to be able to recognize that and make those changes. And that sometimes is a difficult, thing to do.
Definitely. That's right. One thing that a lot of people tend to do for bringing people in is they look for people who are very similar to themselves. And it feels like they're just more synergistic and they get along, but then there's no one to challenge their ideas. What have you seen in terms of bringing people who are very similar and people who are very different and may cause more clashes, but get different points of view?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with it. This is probably one of the number one things for me. So let's just give an example. We have someone that has graduated with a PhD from, let's say, MIT, and then they bring on, a bunch of their classmates, to join the company as teammates. And so suddenly you have this company that has, 5 MIT PhDs on the team. On paper that seems great, great pedigree, but are those people really going to be challenging each other with different thoughts and bringing in those different ideas and different perspectives and thinking creatively? I don't know, maybe, but I think I'm a big believer in diversity for startups. As I said, you need to be finding the best people in the world to be working on different things, and so that means you've got billions of people to choose from. You need to find those people that have those different perspectives and different backgrounds that can do exactly what you just said.
Nice. And this is not very closely related, but in Tina Fey's book, she talks about the writers on Saturday Night Live. And she said half of them are basically Harvard-trained classical comedians. And half of them are people who just do improv and like to make things up. And they don't get along at all. But between the two of them, they come up with an excellent product.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm a huge Tina Fey fan, so.
Love it. All right, we are going to need to start wrapping up. So let me ask you a couple more questions. One is, how can people reach out to you if they want to learn more about you and get some of your insights?
Sure, yeah. Take a look at Pangea Ventures, and my email is simply andrew@pangeaventures.com, and I'll get back to you. The other thing is just reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I try to get back to people pretty regularly.
Great. I will put a link to your LinkedIn and your webpage so that people can find you easier. And then lastly, is there one piece of communication advice that you think everyone can benefit from?
Yeah, I think you need to be open and honest and transparent. Often we find people will sugarcoat things, or kind of manage they'll compartmentalize information. So some people will hear this story, and some people hear a little bit of a different story, and it's highly curated and managed, and ultimately that doesn't work, right? Like you need to be open and upfront. I always like to say, start with the bad news. Don't hide that. And the other thing is, ultimately, everyone is a human being, and most human beings just want to have their voices heard. And so you need to be a really good listener, and you need to hear what people are saying, and really take that in. Ultimately, you might decide to disagree with them, but you need to be heard, and that's what most people just want to see. And I think if you sort of live by that will serve you well.
I love both of those. And on the people wanting to feel seen and heard, I will talk to managers or executives about that, and they don't actually roll their eyes, but it feels close to them rolling their eyes until I go through the statistics of productivity and financial outcome that happens when people are actually feel seen and heard and they're engaged. They're like, oh, yep, I guess that is important.
Right. And one of the things is, it's often easy to tell, like, 90% of actually, what is heard is through facial expressions and body language, not necessarily the words that you say. So how you respond to these discussions is really important.
Perfect. I love it. And let's end it on that. Andrew, it has been wonderful having you here with us. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Neuroconversant Leadership. We're over 100 episodes now. And as mentioned, I'm going to be making some changes. So I would love your feedback on what changes I should make, what things I should add, what things I should take away. Please do me a favor and reach out either on LinkedIn or on my email address, which is jdoran@neuroconversantleadership.com. I look forward to hearing your suggestions. Thanks a lot. Until next time, have a great week.